Hello learners, good afternoon. Today we will be dealing with the chapter The Road Not Taken, that is a part of your syllabus. The poem The Road Not Taken was written by Robert Frost. He was an American poet who depicted realistic New England life through language and situations familiar to the common man. Robert Frost was an American poet and winner of 4 Pulitzer Prizes. His famous works include Fire and Ice, Mending Wall, Birches, Out Out, Nothing Gold Can Stay, and Home Burial. His 1916 poem, The Road Not Taken, is often read at graduation ceremonies across the United States. Frost eventually became a poetic force and the unofficial Poet Laureate of the United States. Robert Frost wrote The Road Not Taken as a joke for a friend, the poet Edward Thomas. When they went walking together, Thomas was chronically indecisive about which road they ought to take, and in retrospect often regretted that they should in fact have taken the other road. Soon after writing the poem in 1915, Frost gripped to Thomas that he had read the poem to an audience of college students and that it had been taken pretty seriously. Frost creates a multiplicity of meanings in the poem, learners, never quite allowing one to supersede the other. Even as The Road Not Taken describes how choices are inevitable in life. In the poem, The Road Not Taken, the road symbolizes our life. The poet says that the path that we don't choose in our life is road not taken. Learners, he describes his feelings about that choice that he had left in the past. The path we have chosen describes our future, our destination. The important message that the poet wants to give is that the choice that we make has an impact on our future. And if we make a wrong choice, we regret it. But sadly, we can't go back on it. So we must be wise while making choices. Learners, The Road Not Taken begins with a dilemma, as many fairy tales do. Out walking, the speaker comes to a fork or a juncture in the road and has to decide which path to follow. So learners, this is a picture of a fork. This can be described as the fork which is mentioned in the poem. So a fork is basically it is a point from where 2 different paths start. Learners, now let's go through the poem together. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveller long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere, ages and ages hence, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by. And that has made all the difference. Learners, let's go through the poem line by line. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. The poet, while travelling on foot in the woods, reaches a junction where 2 roads diverge. Once the poet was walking down a road, and then there was a diversion. There were 2 different paths, and he had to choose one out of them. The poet says that he was one person. He could not travel on both the roads. You know, learners, in this poem, the poet is confused. He says that he's just one person. How can he travel on both the roads? So one person can travel on one road at one time. Okay, so he is constantly talking about this dilemma in the poem. He had to choose one out of these two roads. In the poem, yellow wood means a forest with leaves which are wearing out and they have turned yellow in color in the season of autumn. It also represents a world which is full of people, where people have been living for many years. They represent people who are older and the poet, like, in the poem. So, yellow, it is described for older people. The poet kept standing there and looked at the path very carefully as far as he could. Before taking the path, he wanted to know how it was. Was it suitable for him or no? He was able to see the path till from where it curved, after which it was covered with trees and was hidden. It happens in our life, learners, also when we have choices, we have alternatives. But we have to choose only one out of them. We take time to think about the pros and cons, whether it is suitable for us or not, and only then we take a decision on what path we should choose. The yellow leaves, again learners, I am repeating, the yellow leaves in the poem suggest that the poem is set in autumn, perhaps in a section of woods filled mostly with alder or birch trees. The yellow leaves also evoke a sense of transience. Transience means movement, where one season will soon give way to another. Okay, so yellow leaves, they also evoke what? Yes, movement, transformation, change. Learners, let's go through lines 3 to 5. And be one traveller, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. As it is possible to travel both the roads, the poet stands there trying to choose which path he is going to take. However, the poet wants to go down both paths and is thinking about it hard. He is staring down one road, trying to see where it goes. But the small plants and greenery of the woods block his view. The poet kept on looking at one path for a long time to check if it is the right path for him or not. And then he decided and started walking on another path because he felt that both the paths are equally good. He says just as fair, so he felt that both paths were equally good and started walking on one of them. He adds that maybe he felt that the other path was better for him. So he chooses it as it had grass on it, which means that it was less used. So learners, what did you learn? What did you understand? You understood that the poet chose the path which was less traveled by. And how did he choose that? Because that path had more grass on it. So more grass meant that less people must have traveled on it and it was less used as compared to the other path. So that is why he chose the less traveled and the less explored path. Not many people had walked on that path earlier. That is why this path was grassy. And wanted where means that it was not walked over by many people. After he walked on the path for some distance, he realized that both the paths had been worn out the same way. Both the paths were similar and worn out. Even in our life, learners, we take any path or option, but all of them have the same benefits, disadvantages, problems, challenges, and we must face them. We think that we are choosing a better option, but it is not that way. Learners, let's go through lines 6 to 8. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. This phrase could mean something like it is like just as fair as it is fair, means something which is equal, something which is righteous. The poet decided to check the other path because he found the other road to be less traveled and more grassy. The poet says that both the paths were similar that morning. Both had leaves on them and no one stepped on them as they were still green in color. He decided that day he would take one path and keep the other path for another day. although he knew that one way leads on to another way. He knew he could not go back on the choice that he had made. Similarly, even in our life, once we choose an option, we must keep on moving ahead with that option, and we never get a chance to come back and take the other option that we had left earlier, learners. So always remember, once you have decided something, you cannot go back. It becomes very difficult to go back. And the same difficulty is faced by the poet. Okay, so he has chosen a path and he thinks, okay, today I'll travel on this path, but the next day I'll travel on the other path. But that doesn't happen. Once you start working on a path, it becomes very difficult to come back to the fork, yes, to the juncture. Learners, let's go through lines 9 to 10. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. After travelling through the road, he found that both the roads are equally travelled. First, he found the first road to be more travelled one, but then he says that both the roads to be equally travelled. Later in the poem, learners, the speaker calls the road he chose less travelled, and it does initially strike him as slightly grassier, slightly less travelled. But soon as he makes this claim, however, he doubles back, erasing the distinction even as he makes it. He says that in the future he will take a deep breath and say that once upon a time he had reached such a point in life that there were no options for him, and he travelled on that road which had been travelled upon by lesser number of people. That decision of his has led him to the future. Similarly, in future, learners, when you grow up, then you will say that once upon a time when you were young, you had two options in your life. But the choice that you made you what you became of it. This is very strong message for all the learners, that you should be wise and be careful while making choices out of the options that you have in your life, because your future depends on the choice that you make today. Okay, learners, so be wise in choosing your path. The title of the poem, The Road Not Taken, if you keep reading the poem, you will notice that, the title hovers over it like a ghost. According to the title, this poem is about absence. It is about what the poem never mentions, the choice the speaker did not make, which still haunts him. Again, however, Frost refuses to allow the title to have a single meaning. The road not taken also evokes the idea of the road less travelled, the road most people did not take. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Here again the poet found both the paths looking same. Perhaps he goes in the flashback. It was tough for him to recognize the real world, as in the morning he was the first person to walk on the road. He couldn't decide the right path, as no step had smashed the leaves on the roads to allow him to go for the right one. Learners, these lines are an example of imagery. Okay, we'll discuss about imagery and we'll discuss about the different literary devices mentioned in the poem later. Okay, but keep on noting, keep on jotting these points which I keep telling you. Okay, let's go through lines 13 to 15. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way. I doubted if I should ever come back. The poet, like I have said before, the poet here saves the first road for another day. He knows how way leads to another and then another, until you end up very far away from where you started. The poet here saves the first road for another day. Then in the third, he doesn't think he will ever, the third stanza, although he mentions in the poem that he is saving the first road for another day, but by the end of the poem we know that he doesn't think he will ever come back and take the other path as much as he wishes he could. I shall be telling this with a sigh. This line is an example of poet's failure in choosing the right path. The word sigh, learners, the word sigh reflects a little bit of disappointment. He fails because of his decision. Let's go through lines 17 to 19. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled. He accepts the fact that he is a failure in taking the right decision. Ages and ages, learners, in this slide is an example of alliteration. What is alliteration? Alliteration is basically repetition of consonants in a line. Okay, so you can write it down. Ages and ages is an example of alliteration. So, learners, why is the poet regretting? He might be regretting because he chose the road less travelled. He chose the path which was not taken up by many. So, this might be one of the reasons for his despondence, okay, for his sadness. And that has made all the difference. The poet took the path that no one else did, and that is what has made the difference in his life. And that has actually made him successful. However, a difference could mean success or utter failure. In the fourth stanza, we can see that poet was talking about his past life. He's talking about nostalgia. Talking about the two roads and the decision he made to choose the road, he's taking this happily. From the last stanza, we can see that Robert Frost took the road which was less travelled by. Maybe he was a coward, that is why he chose the long road, and he was just joking by telling that. But from the last line of the stanza, learners, it seems the poet may be happy for whatever decision he chose, or for whatever road he chose, and that has made all the difference with others. Learners, let's go through the analysis of the poem. So like you know, what is the rhyme scheme? The rhyme scheme of the poem is A-B, A-A-B. The poet in the poem decided to seize the day and express himself as an individual by choosing the road that was less explored. However, the narrator's decision to choose the less travelled path shows his courage. In terms of the beauty, both paths are equally fair. The narrator only distinguishes the path from another after he has already selected one and travelled for many years through life. The road not taken, learners, is Frost's, yes, most beloved poems, and this poem is frequently studied in many high school literature classes. Learners, let's go through some themes of the poem. So the first theme that the poet mentions in the poem is choices. The road not taken centers on the concept of choice. The path that the speaker is working on is splitting in two directions, and he has to decide which way to go. This path, not just in the woods, but also represents a decision in his life. Something in his life is changing, which is forcing him to make a choice. Yet he has a really hard time deciding. One moment he thinks one way is better, the next both paths are about the same. Whether or not he has a reason why the choice he makes is better, he has to make it. Okay, so he has to reason it out. Learners, even you do that. Before making a choice or before making a decision, you reason it out. So this poem, you can say that this poem is about reasoning. Before taking the final decision, yes, the poet is reasoning. So whether or not he has a reason why the choice he makes is better, he has to make it. And that choice changes his life. The second theme can be dreams, hopes and plans. Choices, like the choice, the road not taken, are linked to the future. The speaker of this poem realizes that his choice of path will change his life. But the tricky part about the nature of the future is that the speaker won't know how his decision will change his life until he has already changed it. The speaker thinks of his lost opportunities as his choice takes him into one future and leaves another behind. The third theme, learners, yes, man and the natural world. Throughout the road not taken, nature is used as a metaphor for the life of speaker. The speaker contextualizes a major decision by writing about it as if it was something he encountered while walking in a forest in the season of autumn. This metaphor helps us to wrap our minds around the complexities of a choice that will decide his future. Learners, exploration is our next theme. Our speaker is out in the woods without a map, and he doesn't know which path to take. But instead of turning tail and running back to where he came from, he chose a path and forges on it, learners. He moves on it. At least he's confident. He's confident and willing to face whatever challenges that path may lead him to. Okay, so exploration is an excellent theme. He doesn't shy away from exploring. He doesn't shy away, or he doesn't fear the challenges. Come what may, he's ready to face anything that comes on his way. He's attracted to a path that might be less traveled, which suggests that he likes to go where few people have gone before. The road not taken, learners, yes, it embraces exploration, suggesting that the only way to see what's beyond the bend in the road is to keep on walking. Learners, so what is the central message of the poem, The Road Not Taken? The road not taken represents the speaker and the reader. Okay, it presents the speaker and the reader with a state of confusion, with a dilemma. There are two roads in an autumnal wood. Wood, learners? Yes, forest. So basically there are two roads in a forest separating off. Presumably the result of the one road splitting, and there is nothing else to do but to choose one of the roads and continue life's journey. The central message is that in life we are often presented with choices. When making a choice, one is required to take a decision. Viewing a choice as a fork, as a juncture in a path, it becomes clear that we must choose one direction or another, but not both. Thank you for listening, learners.